so much. I love you so much. I love you so much. I love you so much.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality and the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness which creates and animates all things. After years of exploring this awe-inspiring truth on this podcast, I'm super excited to announce that we are now going even deeper down the rabbit hole on the new late-night style consciousness-elevating talk show called Optimistic, which features none other than you, the listeners. Optimistic is taped out of the epic, spaceship-esque 8-bedroom property we call the Mystic Manor that myself and the rest of the Optimistic crew now navigate reality from in Venice Beach, California. And you are invited to come experience a Mystic Manor immersion week with us. During your week-long stay, you'll enjoy unique workshops, chef-prepared meals, one-on-one time coaching and consulting with me, and even co-creating magic with me as a guest on both Optimistic and an episode of the Positive Head podcast. When I started this, my aim with these immersive retreats was to facilitate the ultimate spiritual upgrade and tune-up, so to speak, for our guests while providing them with one of the most memorable experiences of their lives. And I'm happy to say that as of this recording, every guest at the end of their trip so far has told me that they have had a profound and transformational experience at the Mystic Manor and that they definitely want to come back. All that being said, we only have a limited number of spots available between now and next July. And as of this recording, about half of those spots are already filled. So if there's any part of you that is screaming, yes, I want to come, I feel like I need to be there, go now and book a slot with me to discuss how we can put our heads together and make it happen at calendly.com/talkwithbrandon. I know for some people, there is also that little voice in their head saying, why not? I can't get off work. I can't afford it, and on and on and on. But, really, Henry Ford, I think, said it best. Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. And I'm confident that where there's a will, there's a way. And I'm personally committed to doing everything in my power, including discounts and payment plans, to get you here if it is something that truly feels like a huge yes for you energetically and like you're meant to be here. Once again, the link to book time to discuss with me is calendly.com/talkwithbrandon. That's spelled calendly.com/talkwithbrandon. All one word, of course. And book in some time and look forward to seeing you soon here at the Mystic Manor. All right, all you positive heads. On this week's Soul Share episode, I'm super excited to have Siraj Raval here sitting with me live and direct here in the studio at the Mystic Manor. And Siraj is an AI educator. He's an author. He's a data scientist, founder of the nonprofit School of AI based in over 400 cities globally. This guy's built the fastest growing AI community in the world. Siraj, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks so much for having me here. It's an honor to be here.
This is we met through my dear friend Michael Rostowski and Lizzie Locke, who were just on the show actually a couple weeks ago. And ever since meeting you, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to have you on to go down this rabbit hole, because it's such a powerful topic to discuss as it pertains to who are we, what are we, what's going on here. There's this sort of this intense and somewhat, I think for some people, frightening perspective of are we living in a simulation? Are we actually what's the separation between robotics and biology, and
Yes.
is it really like reflections of the same energy? And before we go deep down that rabbit hole, which we're going to do, I'd like to just start with the opening question that I always start with. And it's my predictable opener. It is this. You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
I would say elevating human consciousness through technology.
Ooh. Yeah. Give me a little bit of background, because, dude, what you've done is like... Just even saying it on the opener there, I'm like, wow, this is like future legend right here, I feel. That's what energetically it feels like. And, we're just getting to know each other, but it's like, that's a powerful, powerful community that is so relevant to what, it's like, it's everything, right? Coming down the pipe, it's like... So how did you end up doing what you're doing?
Yeah, so I was born in Houston, Texas. I went to college at Columbia University, where I first started studying computer science. Mm-hmm. I ended up dropping out just because I had a startup at the time, and I felt like, the university, I didn't really like academia at all. Mm-hmm. I think just the institution of academia is a little too afraid of pursuing different research directions, particularly in the consciousness direction. Mm-hmm. So then I moved to San Francisco. I worked in Silicon Valley for a couple years. Got a bunch of rejections when I was applying to jobs, and but I learned a lot.
Yeah.
And I worked. The last company I worked for was called Twilio, which is this.
I think I've heard of this.
Yeah, Twilio is like a really kind of classic San Francisco company, 500 people, and I learned a lot about developer education, like how to teach people how to code. And I worked there for 8 months, and just to go right in, real talk, I was fired. And that being fired from Twilio was the greatest thing that's ever happened to me, because, at the time I was thinking I really want to teach people about artificial intelligence. And even before Twilio, I spent 6 months in India. So even though I was born in Houston, my parents are both from India. Mm-hmm. And going there for 6 months was a way for me to see my culture in a way. I'm American, but also the Indian culture.
Yep.
And to see all the beauty of the culture, but also all of the existential level problems there involving pollution. And there's so many problems. We think we have problems in this country.
Yeah.
There are 1 billion people in India. There are 3 times the amount of population in India as there are in the United States. And to see all those problems up front as a person, the smells, the sights, the sounds, it was a life-changing experience for me, because I was like, these problems, we just cannot solve this in our lifetimes.
And it's even closer to home in some way to you, because it's your roots.
It's my roots.
Yeah.
It was so amazing to see that and to say, well, how do I solve this as one person? And I realized from what I learned in Silicon Valley, what if we could create some kind of machine, an artificial intelligence, that could do the work of, say, 10,000 scientists in a millisecond.
Yeah.
It could solve everything for us. It could send out thousands of nanobots into the atmosphere and remove all that CO2 in milliseconds. It could solve problems we didn't even think possible. It could do everything. And so I realized that my purpose in life is to try to make this artificial intelligence happen. Whatever I can do to make that happen would be my life's purpose. So I realized YouTube is the way to do that. Educate people on how this technology works, as many people as possible. Let's raise conscious awareness of this technology. Let's get people building this technology. And so I've been doing that since I was fired from Twilio. I've been doing that for now 4 years, full time. Every week I release 2 videos.
Wow.
And that's just the path I've been on for the past 4 years.
Yeah, and you've got quite the following on YouTube. That's not even something I mentioned. 4 years, about the same amount of time I've been doing this podcast. And isn't it such a beautiful thing when you realize this, I'm fired, this quote unquote negative thing, if you could go back in time, you probably wouldn't change it based off of the trajectory where you're at. You're, interestingly enough, you and I have connected. We're both in the process of, moving into next level video production.
Yes.
You're currently working on a show that's similar in some ways to, Optimistic. You guys know that have been around for a while. It was originally going to be a traveling, me going around the world and highlighting these people doing magical things. That's exactly what your show is going to be, right?
Yeah.
Except for coming at it from, this technology-based perspective. And I just think that's amazing.
Yeah, well, I think we have a similar similar interest in trying to raise human consciousness, like elevating human consciousness, like you do it through spirituality and empowering people with your words, which I think is super powerful. The way I've kind of come at it now after doing this a lot and looking at the data of what people want, what's the most useful thing that could come out of my mouth that could help people in their daily lives, it's financial freedom.
Yeah.
They can use technology to build a business wherever they are in the world, whether it's in the United States or Tanzania, whatever country, gain that financial freedom, not have the anxieties dealing with money, so they can then focus all their energies on meditation and spiritual awakening.
Being creative, right? What I like to say is we are the creator and created rolled into one, right?
Yes.
We are God-godding in a sense. And what does the creator like to do? It likes to create. It's artistic, right? Earth, EARTH, right?
Yes.
So, what I think is fascinating about robotics and technology is, you have people now that are saying like, okay, we are at a point right now where if we were to really you talk about financial freedom and get rid of, sort of like a shift in perspective on work, and you've got to work 50 hours a week or else you're like a loser and you're not contributing to society. And then meanwhile, you have people saying, hey, look, we're at a point where, we can use technology to actually, use robots and use technology and to actually handle most of the menial labor that we need to run the world, right? There's plenty of abundance here for everyone to live well, and we can use technology to create a system where, okay, maybe you're contributing a few hours of some kind of work a week, or maybe there's just a small percentage of people that volunteer, like, oh, I want to be the one, the 5% that need to work. My soul's called to be that person, and everyone else go create art, be creative, meditate, work on your spirituality, whatever it is. And I think there's some real truth to us being at that point in our evolution. And I even, who did I have recently who was talking about, they had a vision of the future, and it was, I can't remember who, I talked to so many interesting people like having a vision through this or that or whatever it is. And they were just basically saying that they had a vision that we would work like from 17 to 19, you would contribute 2 years of quote unquote work, and then you were free to sort of play, right? And that was everyone's sort of sign up, and this is like 1,000 years in the future or whatever. And I think that is a really interesting idea conceptually, and I think we're getting close to being there, and I'm curious, like we could do it, not that we are even close to like implementing it, but what are your thoughts on all that?
We could definitely do it. I think the very definition of work will change, and technology can help us change that. We've automated so many physical tasks. Like it used to be the case, if you were the strongest person with the biggest muscles, you were the most powerful person in the world.
Right.
But then now we have machines to help us with physical tasks, with like bulldozing and things like that.
Yeah.
The same is going to happen to intellectual strength.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to automate intellectual strength in the same way that we did with physical strength. So right now people have PhDs in topics. They go to medical school for 4 years. They go to law school for 3 years. We will automate all of that domain knowledge as well, so that everything that we know of today as a job will become automated. We will have a machine be a doctor. We will have a machine be a lawyer. And so what that means for the future of human work is that we will focus on the only thing that humans can do that machines cannot: the ability to love and be loved. Automation technology is going to free us to focus on personal growth and creativity and spirituality, as long as we first automate not just physical but intellectual tasks. So it's just like a ladder that we're getting to.
Yeah, wow, what a cool perspective, man. So I'd love to hear a little bit, what you've done, and it hasn't been it's been in a relatively short period of time, the School of AI that you've kind of started and helping to educate people, share a little bit about that, would you?
Yeah, so I started off just on YouTube as a social media platform, like promoting my own educational content. And over time, I've built an audience for that. And so about a year ago, I had this idea, like, what if I created this kind of Google form where I was like, sign up to be a representative of this idea, the School of AI in your local city.
Yeah.
And I made one video where I promoted this idea of the School of AI. I outlined the 7 values that we have. For example, we embrace the weird. Anything that is different or strange, we embrace that. We choose love, not fear. And based on these values, I said, join the School of AI, be a representative. I got 1,600 applications in a week.
Wow.
Which was a lot. And it was just a great thing about building a social media following beforehand. them.
Yeah.
And then I selected 800 of them, so 2 per city. And then literally in a week, I went from having nothing to a global organization. And then over time in our Slack channel where we all talk, I saw pictures of people in rural Sudan, and people in India, and people in Brazil, all over the world, with the School of AI logo that I kind of just hackily designed in my room in San Francisco at the time, putting it up, hosting meetups, teaching people about AI. And I realized, man, this is the great thing about technology. You can use it as a force for good. You can amplify whatever thought or motive you have 1,000-fold, 10,000-fold in a way that hasn't been possible even 20 years ago.
Yeah, dude. You just showed me the sizzle for your new show, and I instantly got so excited, hearing you talk about, this idea that AI is doom and gloom, oh, here's the end, the robots are coming to, Terminator, it's coming, and you're no, that's not, that's not the perspective to adopt. And it's kind of I talk about it all the time on the show. It's things are sort of neutral by design. You used the example of, was it fire? Yeah. It can warm you or it can burn you. Yep. Right? That's such a great example. I love that. It's so good. And it's that's just so true. It's what are we going to do with it? It's going to determine. And the fact that you're stepping forward as a voice to say, hey, this is actually not something to fear. This is let's lean into love and what the benefits can be, not all the dark, scary, shadow side of it, right?
Yes. The very definition of what it means to be human, we're going to start designing that over time using this technology. So we're going to start expanding beyond what we are biologically limited by with technologies like artificial intelligence, but also other emerging technologies like genetic engineering and say neural interface technology that's actually being built here in LA at a company called Kernel. We're going to start designing what we want to be. We can design ourselves to have an IQ over 200. We can design ourselves to have an empathy that's beyond what we even think possible. We can get into these states of consciousness that we right now use entheogens like DMT to achieve. Yeah. We can do the same with technology like neural interfaces and AI. So it's a super exciting time. So we have to decide, what do we want to be? What do we want to be beyond human? Because now it's our choice to decide what we want to evolve into.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. And you start applying some of these concepts that, I lean into, oh, okay, you're having your own private experience in your own private YO universe. And from this moment forward, there's all kinds of versions of reality that you can step into. The way I view it is you're kind of there could be someone right now listening to this doom and gloom, everything's going to hell in a handbasket. That's it. And they literally, their soul steps into a timeline where that's what they see. There's that version. If you think about God being infinite or source being infinite or consciousness being infinite, it plays out every scenario. Yes. So the question to me that's super empowering is, when you start thinking you're in your own private universe, oh, so I'm the only one here. Everything's a prop in my movie. What timeline am I going to choose to align with and step into based off of my view of, is this thing going to burn me or is it going to warm me? And, I think that's, it's a really empowering way to view reality. For me, it's I'm going to get warm, toasty by the fire. I'm all about comfort myself, Yes. And I think it's just it's really cool to see someone like yourself showing up with that's the banner that I'm carrying, right? That's where I'm going to put my focus. That being said, there are certainly some things to be, aware of that, what it would look like, some of the doom and gloom, of what it could look like if it really we took it in the wrong direction is pretty intense.
Absolutely. I mean, one way it could go wrong is for, say, automating war. I mean, this is already happening. It's turning war into this game of it's turning war into a game basically, where there are no human lives that are actually being, put at risk. You can have an automated drone go kill 10,000 people, and it's piloted by an artificial intelligence system. This is already happening. How do we prevent that? It's got to come from an awareness perspective, and in terms of policy, we've got to all be aware, organize ourselves collectively, and say no. We do not want this to be used for killing. Yeah. And so it's got to be just an awareness.
Yeah. Right. So, you talked about us engineering ourselves to IQ over 200, and this sort of idea that it makes me think back. To hearing something a while back talking about how we're going to basically become cyborgs.
Yeah.
We're going to use artificial intelligence to like make ourselves way more intelligent. Like the human as it is now is going to go away. We're going to basically merge biology with with the artificial intelligence, and there's some people who are like, and it's an interesting thing. They say, speaking of people who claim to have had visions of the future, or I think of a friend who talked about having a really powerful ayahuasca experience, and in that experience he was like super powerful. He actually made it himself. I remember him telling me the story. I made it myself at home, which I've never met anyone who's done that.
Yeah.
He figured,
Very talk to this guy.
Yeah, very smart guy. And he's like, and I had this powerful experience, with like, I remember him saying he was pouring tea, and all of a sudden he was like, in Japan as this Japanese man, like pouring tea, and then all of a sudden he went into a choice point moment of like, oh, we'll give you an option right now. You can go like 1,000 years in the future, or continue to explore where you're at right now. And he's like, you went 1,000 years in the future. Then they gave him from there, you can continue exploring here, go 1,000,000 years in the future. And I remember at 1,000 years in the future, him talking about what he was shown is like there's been two different versions of humanity that had sort of split around, started to split around now. Those of us who remained organic and really started tapping in spiritually to expand ourselves, and those that went full cyborg AI, became sort of like, these, just very different than like the more, he's like, so the ones that had went the more organic route were very like, telepathic, and these like, just powerful energies. The others, there was like a lot more like, darkness that had happened as a result of those choice points. And so, I mean, that gets pretty out there, obviously. So I'm curious, what your thoughts are about. Do you feel like if they came to you right now and say, okay, we're gonna go in and do something to enhance your intelligence right now using artificial intelligence, is it something you would be like, yes, sign me up, or
I'd be the first in line.
Yeah.
I think that you're right that there is this kind of disconnect between like people who are just hardcore technologists and people who are hardcore into spirituality. But I'd like to bridge that gap, and this is like a newer thing for me. I was on this technologist front where I was like, technology is everything. I was totally a materialist in that. Everything that we can prove with classical mechanics and quantum mechanics, that is all that exists, and everything else is fake. I grew up in a family where my dad was Muslim, my mom was Hindu, my grandparents were atheist, my aunt was Christian. So I grew up with all the religions in my family. Thanksgiving was interesting to me. So I was always skeptical of all religions. But just 8 months ago, I started reading the Bhagavad Gita, which is like the Hindu, it's like the Hindu book. Yeah. And I guess I started putting into practice what it was saying, like the disciplines of yoga, like a lot of things of what you're saying are reflected in the Gita. For example, act selflessly. So every action should be selfless, but also be detached from the results of your actions. Yeah. It's like a 50-50% equation. If you act selflessly, then it won't matter what the results of your actions are, because you already know that you're acting in the best interest of others. Yep. And so meditating every day. These are the disciplines of the mind, body, and speech to achieve higher states of consciousness. Yogis in ancient India would cut the frenulum under their tongue so they could reach back farther into their esophagus so they could breathe more efficiently. So meditation, these are all technologies to achieve higher states of consciousness in that way. Yeah. AI is also a technology to achieve higher states of consciousness. So I'd like to bridge that gap by saying things like, how do we meditate better? How do we reduce our anxiety and depression and achieve this optimal state of consciousness? In the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about it as this state called Brahman. So while the scientists in the West were experimenting with materials, the yogis of the East were experimenting with different states of consciousness using these different technologies. So how do we achieve that with silicon and with software and with hardware? I think we can do the same thing. We just have to, like, for example, one app that I use every day is called Insight Timer, which helps me meditate. That's a great one. Yeah. But there's also like all sorts of like devices that you put on your head that can help. Muse is a great example of AI used to achieve higher states of consciousness. Yeah. Another one is I practice what I preach as well. Like I use AI for everything health related. So for example, I use a Peloton to bike every day, and it shows me real time feedback of my heart rate and how to achieve better physical health. There's also mental health, right, as well. How can you use AI to achieve better states of consciousness where you don't have anxiety and depression? One example is this app called Wobot, which is basically a cognitive behavioral therapy trained chatbot that you can talk to in real time for free at any time to help reduce your anxiety and depression, which I suffer from. So it's great to see that there are technologies to achieve states of mental clarity and peace in the same way that the mystics and the spiritual people do as well. So I think we just got to try to bridge that gap and say that we can move in 2019 and moving forward. It's not just about technology. It's about conscious technology, spiritual technology. Let's combine our cultures together because we have the same goal, achieving that state of inner solitude and peace and realizing that the inner consciousness, the Atman, as is said in the Gita, can connect in the still mind, in the depths of meditation. We can connect to the universal consciousness known as Brahman.
I love this. So I want to just offer something because you just made a statement, anxiety and depression, which I suffer from. And, I would like to just offer to you that in this moment, you're feeling good. You're not anxious. You're not depressed. So how important it is to really, to add to all this is like, abracadabra means I create as I speak, right? And so when you understand that every moment you're being born anew, right? It's like, so I think a more accurate statement is I have suffered from anxiety and depression.
I like that.
And I'm in the process of now experiencing what it's like not to. So you have no requirement to carry that forward in any way, shape, or form unless you decide to, right? So if we tell the story, it's like, oh, this is a thing that is me. Then, of course, it's like abracadabra, as I create as I speak. And so it's really, as I'm experiencing you right now, it's like this person who's just like so inspiring, not anxious, not seeming depressed, not so, and this is the only moment that exists, right? You can't show me your past, really. I mean, you could show me a picture or whatever, but it's like, it's not really there. Your future never shows, it's not exactly like you remember it. Your future, where is it? It's not here. You can guess or whatever, but it's really, we're always in the now. So it's just something, just to offer to everyone out there listening and you that I think is really important and powerful. It's like you are, you're under no obligation to continue being anxious or depressed. And as you continue to expand your own perspective, I think what's interesting about your path is, you've gone this very logical, technology-based, obviously highly intelligent individual, and now the spiritual side has really started to open up in the last 8 months, as you said. So I think with that, for you, you're going to continue abracadabra. You're going to continue to find like, oh, anxiety and depression is no longer really a part of this new Siraj that is like, sort of, and that anxiety and depression in the past actually served as a great tool, right? We can't know that which we are, and we can't unless we know that which you're not. It's like there's no great work of art without shadow in it. It's like, okay, cool. So I got to experience that so that I can really appreciate like what I'm moving into. This like incredibly inspiring leader on the forefront of technology, and so yeah, that's
super valuable. I think that's something I've learned from you is like the words that we use really matter, and I'm definitely guilty of that, and I think that's super valuable. The disciplines of speech are something that I need to practice.
Well, we teach best what we most need to learn. So anytime I'm ever speaking about any of these things, it's like, that's because I need it too. We all, like, there's no one listening that hasn't done the exact same thing. I've done it in the last 24 hours, said something that's carrying the past forward in a way that doesn't necessarily serve me, So, yeah, just want to offer that for everyone out there.
No, for sure. It's super valuable.
Yeah, it really is.
We have over, I think it's like 210 cognitive biases that are built into the human brain. We all suffer from everything from like the sunk cost fallacy. There are 210. You can actually make a map of all of these.
Wow.
And that's why we have to practice these disciplines, because it's so hard to be human. It is a very hard thing to be a human. So that's why I think technology can help us. Like achieve mastery, self-mastery.
Right.
Self-realization.
Yeah. So you mentioned your initial interest in like quantum mechanics and that whole side of thing. How do you have a lot of people now who are looking at like quantum physics and saying, it's like, was it Niels Bohr said, like, if you are not like spooked or something, I'm paraphrasing, by quantum physics, you don't really understand. What's good
quote.
Yeah.
If you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't.
right. And it's like it's really, I feel like quantum physics in spirituality are doing a dance right now that is like unprecedented. It's like mirroring, like the double slit experiment, for example. Like, I think it's like showing, like, hold on, like, when consciousness observes these particles, they're in one space, one spot. When it's not observing, they're in a state of quantum superposition. And I think that really like mirrors what we're talking about here. It's like, there's all these potential timelines based off of which one I focus on is which one snaps into reality. It's like, this idea that it's kind of like AI, that maybe, or like a video game rather, where as I look, my consciousness turns its gaze there, like reality is snapping into a spot, right? It's snapping into, it's rendering, like the video game when you're walking down the hallway in the castle, it's not there until you turn the corner and then it renders on the screen, right? What are your thoughts? And I just threw out like probably 5 different things right there. So, what are your thoughts?
I think that is totally how I now perceive reality to be. Like, it is rendered as we view it, as we look at it. And there are many interpretations of quantum mechanics. Like, the Copenhagen one is the Copenhagen interpretation is the one that most quantum scientists agree as to what the reality is. But then there's the many worlds interpretation, which is what you're saying, which I agree with as well, which is outside of the mainstream of what most physicists would agree on, but that's the problem with physics. So I went to this facility in Vancouver I was invited to by a company called D-Wave. They're a quantum computing company, and I didn't know anything about quantum computing 12 months ago when I went there. When I went there, I went into their laboratory. There's like 5 levels of security to get in there. Once I got in there, they have this machine, and you have to cool it to negative 274 degrees Fahrenheit in order to get that quantum superposition state, which they can then use to create computing platforms. Right. So when I was there, I was like, this blows my mind. This is nothing like I've ever seen before in technology. From there, I started learning about quantum mechanics to see how they're building this technology. And when I started learning quantum mechanics using the Feynman lectures, which I would recommend to anyone wanting to learn about quantum mechanics, Richard Feynman's Lectures Volume 3, great book. When I started learning about quantum mechanics, I realized the very fundamental nature of reality as we perceive it in our textbooks in school is actually, it's probably wrong. And the hottest topic for physicists in 2019 is quantum gravity. What that means is we can split all of physics into 2 different fields. We have classical mechanics, it's why planes fly, it's why we have transistors. And then we have quantum mechanics, which is the reality at the atomic level. But they don't fit together. So the idea is that gravity, it's all around us. We all have a gravitational pull. But we can't define gravity in an equation. So the idea is to say force of gravity equals, and then write out that equation. The problem is that we don't know how to do that. There is no force of gravity equation that we can
this mystery. Right?
It's a mystery. And so I think the answer to that mystery is quantum mechanics. If we can incorporate quantum mechanics into the force of gravity, in that we realize that this reality as we perceive it is an illusion, that consciousness, not matter, is fundamental to this reality. We can define that mathematically, and that's actually a paper that I'm writing this week. It's been a while since I've written a research paper, but that's my plan for this week. I'm just going to write this research paper that's basically a panpsychist philosophy, in that consciousness, not matter, is fundamental, and here's how we can use quantum computing to build better forms of AI that take into account this reality, that make it better, which ultimately will allow us to achieve higher states of consciousness. So this is actually really right where I'm at today. After this podcast, I'm going to go home and read this book called I Am a Strange Loop by this amazing consciousness philosopher. It's this huge book, but I have to read it in order to write this paper. But
wow.
I'm super excited.
Yeah, it's just your average week. I'm going to write this research paper, no big deal.
Anyone can write research papers in 2019. It's not about being in academia. Anyone. You don't have to have a PhD.
I love that.
I
love that. So I had a awesome guest a while back. Greg Braden. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work or not, but Greg Braden is an amazing, scientist. He's really one of these people on the forefront of like sort of talking about the merging of science and spirituality. And I remember talking with him. I can't remember if I talked with him about it or he has a show on Gaia called Missing Links. It's freaking awesome. Highly recommend it. And him talking about this idea that we're living in a simulation, that sort of whole perspective that we've heard bubbling up recently, even with like Elon Musk. And, one of the things that I remember Greg talking about, he's like, what's interesting, you can look at a simulation. Well, you can learn something new in a safe environment that you need in the next environment. Right? You can contact people that aren't in the simulation. Yeah. Right? Yeah. You look at some of these spiritual claims, like of talking to extra dimensional entities and spirit guides and higher self and whatever it is. The people in the simulation benefit, like kind of comparing, like there's these rules that are sort of apparently programmed in to some degree. And like, so just going through the kind of checklist of, and how, what we're doing sort of like, sort of mirrors that idea. So curious what your thoughts are on that topic. And of course, Elon Musk coming out with it recently got a lot of buzz. Like, what did he say? Like 1 in a billion chance we're not. He's like, there's 1 in a billion chance or something like that we're in a base level reality. Most likely it's simulation. And
yeah. I think it's likely we're living in a simulation, but then it's like, what does that mean in terms of like, what does that mean as opposed to it's not a simulation?
Right.
Like, yes, it's a simulation in that the reality around me is it's just a facade. It's a light show illusion. Photons and electrons and atoms, but we are actually the same conscious creature. Everything is consciousness, and if that's a simulation, like that's fine. I mean, I guess it doesn't make me feel bad. Or
right.
Sad.
Me too. Same thing. It's kind of like, well, yeah, of course. It's like everything is fractal in nature. It's what I say in the opening of the podcast. How we're we're fractals of the source consciousness that creates and animates all things. And it's like, okay, so if everything is a mirror of, it's like nested Russian dolls, right? And
that's a good one.
And it's like, okay, then it's all like a simulation of something else. If there's something else is like, what does it mean to be a base level reality when it's all base level reality? It's all part of the same whole, and it's infinite, and it's infinitely large as it is infinitely small, sort of thing. And this idea like that God continues to expand, like it's ever expansive in all directions, and it's just like our brains can't even quite even contain it,
Yeah.
So it doesn't really bother me, that idea either, where some people just like really freaks out.
I think one thing that just helps accept reality as it is practice of meditation.
Yep.
And to be frank, certain enthogens can help you realize, it's okay if I die.
Yeah.
It's okay. I'll be here and I'm gone.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Right.
It's part of the larger picture.
Yeah, and it's and what a lot of people that claim to have communicated outside of the simulation, I found, is like, when I remember having a friend on, speaking of using entheogens, this guy, a friend of mine, he had done a research chemical, like 2CB, I think it was. Have you ever heard of the 2CB? So he's like, I had 2CB, and I got the dosage wrong. I did like a 10x dosage. He's measuring out. So it's like, I want to take, this, and I took 10 times that.
Yeah.
And so he's like, dude, he's like, I remember I was in my bathtub, and I had a full, like, just sort of like a death experience, but it wasn't negative. It's like everything transformed. And he's like, I remember being in that state, and I was like, oh, this is like death. And then he's like, and then how familiar it was. And he was just like, he came out of it like laughing. He's like, oh my God, death is like this thing we're so familiar with. It's like old hat to us.
Yeah.
It's like a big nothing. Like to us, it's this big deal, and the end of my life and my care. And it's like when you get there, it's like, oh, here again. Like, oh my God, can you believe how we took it so seriously? Like, I wish I had the quote pulled up. It's such a beautiful one. It talks about, we'll get there and we'll laugh at our pain or what we thought was separation, because it becomes so like almost cute, that we're just like babies. We don't even remember, right?
Yeah.
Really.
They say the wise grieve neither for the living nor the dead. As the same person inhabits the body at birth, youth, and old age, so too they inhabit a new body afterwards. The cycle of reincarnation, which I believe.
Yeah.
I think it's the most likely scenario.
There's a lot of evidence, man. When that's what I love is when you see like, it's like I talk about a lot of these concepts, like apply them and see for yourself what they do. When you have like a kid born using India as an example, it's like where it's not necessarily, it's taught that, reincarnation, like, yeah, of course, like, you've probably seen the quote before, like this like, how does it go? Like, I remembered that I'm God. And it's like, oh, finally you remembered, haha, kind of thing. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen this, and I'm doing a horrible job of paraphrasing it, but it's like, the Westerner wakes up and is like, I am God. And the Eastern is like, oh, yeah, you remember your God, finally,
Well, I think even say, like Jesus Christ, for example, he said the kingdom of heaven is within you.
I and the Father are one. With the faith of a mustard seed, you can move a mountain. What is he talking about? Creating your reality with your beliefs. Like, you'll do greater things than I. So he wasn't saying, hey, worship me, put me on a pedestal, make a religion around me, and, create all these control structures. He never said that. He wasn't a Christian.
Nope.
He said, like, hey, I'm God. And you'll do greater things than me. So, well, what does that math look like? If you're God and you'll do greater things, even when he was about to be, and of course they didn't have video cameras or recording devices, so what was really said exactly, who knows, right? But supposedly on his, on his trial, that was his response to, was it Pontius Pilate, I think, if I'm recalling from Bible class as a kid. He's like, they're putting him on trial. Hey, we're going to put you to death. What do you got to say for yourself? You're going around claiming you're God. And he's like, isn't it written in your Old Text, referring to the Old Testament, ye are gods? And even said it like plural like that, and it's like, what? That was his defense, he's teaching the same thing we're talking about right here and now.
He was.
Right? Just in a different time.
Absolutely. And I totally think that he wouldn't have been as into this institution of Christianity that we've created over time. Jesus was his own.
He taught love.
Yeah. Awakened individual.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm sure there are like real Christians out there who follow Jesus and not this kind of institution around it.
Sure.
And who are loving and
I think a lot of people, I like to put it like this, Siraj, it's like Jesus was a man, and they talked about like all, this whole he's going to come back sort of thing, right? What I think he's talking about coming back is like Jesus isn't coming back. That man died. Christ consciousness is coming back right now. It's having its like resurgence, even like I will come back and save the planet, kind of save the world. Like Christ consciousness, not the man Jesus. Christ is here. Like I am emanating. You are emanating in this moment. We're Christ consciousness is a state. Like Buddha consciousness is. I think Osho talked about it like. Oh, these are like sort of different flavors of the same thing. You know what I mean? Like there can be this particular, he was talking about lesser known, I always say Jesus is like the Beatles. There's other bands, right?
Yeah,
but everyone knows the Beatles, right?
The Beatles.
Yeah, and so he's the Beatles. He's the most popular, at least in, the Western world, and probably worldwide the most, but then you have Buddha, and then you have all these lesser known enlightened beings, right? And he talked about like, I think it was Osho, talked about like the different. Yeah, me too. And, just side note with Osho is like, here's a being who, some of his teachings, like some of the most mind-melding, like brilliant perspectives I've ever read.
So ahead of his time.
Oh, dude. And then you take like Wild Wild Country and people like are, oh my gosh, like this guy was ego, whatever. Like, it's like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, I think a lot of people do that. We try and like, okay, either good, bad, right? It's like, don't. He was brilliant, and I believe he had some ego-related things to sort out, right? Yeah. And that's okay. I think we all do to varying degrees. I even heard it said on his deathbed, that's the last thing he talked about. Was like, I thought you could get rid of ego, and you can't, or something, EGO, edging God out. EGO, everybody's greatest obstacle. Here's the guy with 100 Rolls Royces and whatever. Yeah. But what was it, I don't know. And I don't know for sure because I didn't know him personally and, or anything like that. But anyway, I kind of digress. So he was talking about, this idea that these different entities, like actually Christ consciousness is a certain brand of a path to remembering, right? Like really good with words, really good. There's another, he named some lesser known, enlightened being. It's like, oh, this being said nothing. Words were not their thing at all. It was just like you'd just be around them, and the emanation of their vibration would transform people and awaken people, So like it's a very interesting idea of different paths. Like Jesus just happens to be like,
one avatar.
Yeah, one avatar, right? Which I really resonate with that particular avatar. It's like for a while I was raised, my dad, interestingly enough, very spiritual, but what I feel like a less evolved, and I'm not saying that in a negative way, like he's out, door knocking, inviting people to his church every Saturday, and like, man, I so respect his like dedication. He's 70 some years old, and he's getting up every day going and not door knocking to invite people to his church with this very close-minded perspective, So I view him as like, he has my birthday. It's like, oh, we're obviously very connected. Like, oh, he's just a version of me that's still lost in the fear base. For him, it's like, he had a dad that was sort of abusive, and like, oh, you get it right, or dad's gonna hurt you, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a lot of, it's like fear driven. Like, I need to get this right, or else I'm gonna get tortured for eternity, and it's like, to me, it's such a silly notion. It's like God is love, and we're, most people would agree with that statement, and we're a fragment of the love that God is. Yes. So what you're telling me is when I really evolve to understand love more, I'm into torture. Like, take your child. One thing that I'll say to people is like, okay, so you as a fragment of God's love, right? Would you agree with that? Yes, Mr. Religious Person. Yeah. Okay, cool. You would. So you agree God is love to the infinite. You're a fragment of that. Now, as a fragment of that, like a small, chip off the block in your capacity to love, is there anything your child could ever do where you would torture them for eternity? I've never had anyone say yes. So what you're telling me is if I evolve to be way more loving, then I really get into this torture thing. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's
a flawed premise, for sure. And I can relate. Like, my dad was the same way. His dad is the same way. Like, he would get mad at him if he wasn't super religious. And it's this fear versus love mentality, which needs to end.
Yeah. FEAR, forget everything and run, or face everything and rise. Nice. I love. Okay, back to, we've gotten so down the sort of esoteric rabbit hole. I want to kind of steer back a little bit to, technology and robotics, and some of the things that I found really interesting. I just would like your opinion on. Like, have you heard about like these? I think it was a University of Washington scientists who supposedly put malicious code into DNA.
I didn't hear about that.
Have you heard this?
I can understand how that could work.
Wow. Yeah. Like, what you get on the more, fear-based perspective of what could be done, or that you can like actually take and, do anything like to DNA that is non-biological, sort of is wild. Or the theoretical physicist James Gates talked about computer code. It feels like he discovered, if I recall it, like computer code embedded in the equations of string theory. Like, have you heard
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what?
That's amazing. I mean, that kind of points to the simulation hypothesis. If there is some code there, then it's likely a simulation.
Likely a simulation, like, or this idea of like, some people talk about like, as we understand DNA more, and like this junk DNA, when hold on, actually we just don't understand what it's doing, and there's like evidence that it has been manipulated, in some way. I don't know if you ever heard this, which then ties into the idea like, oh, there's like, alien, extraterrestrial beings that, sort of like hybridized us and created us, and,
I think that's a totally plausible idea, actually.
To me, it's very highly plausible.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ancient cultures across different geographic spans that had similar paintings and art related to some kind of godlike being coming down and providing them with this ancient knowledge. I don't think it's totally weird to say that. And in terms of what you were talking about, DNA and like and adding malicious code to DNA, right now in China they created this first kind of like monkey human hybrid
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, it sounds crazy, but they killed it after 3 days, but they birthed it. So
Really?
it shows it's possible to splice DNA and create a new species
Wow, I haven't heard this.
using genetic engineering. And this is just going to continually improve over time. Like, there's a bunch of different trends that are going to make this happen much faster than we would think. The rise in computing power, the rise in the amount of data, right? Every single day, trillions of petabytes of data are generated. All this is fuel for AI algorithms to generate new types of DNA that we wouldn't even think possible before. So like I said before, we're going to have to decide what we want our future humans to look like. Like, for example, I'm 28 years old. I plan on having kids someday. I'm going to probably wait about 5 years before having kids because I think my bet is that in 5 years, we'll be able to decide the traits we want our kids to have. So I can say for sure, no kind of birth defects, any kind of like diseases, but also I'd like my kid to start off with superhuman intelligence. Maybe a little bit increase in their empathy, even from before they're born. We can engineer these things with DNA. And right now it might seem weird to some people, but in the future it might seem morally wrong to not do that, to leave it to chance.
Right. So then you get into this idea of like chance. Is it chance? It's like, could my son have been different? Like, was it meant to be exactly who he is? And then you get into the ideas of like, oh, well, there's various timelines maybe where he didn't even appear, or my father almost died when he was a little boy. Like, oh, is there a timeline where that happened? Or my grandfather, who was at Pearl Harbor when it got bombed, is there a timeline where he got?
He was at Pearl Harbor?
He was at Pearl Harbor and jumped ship and swam to survive,
That's a pretty cool story.
Yeah, pretty cool, right? It's like, wow, what would have happened if, not? Or, I had a woman recently on the show, Julie Ryan, who's really interesting because she was like very traditional, like patented all these surgical instruments, owned like 9 companies, and she went down a whole path of like, oh, I want to learn and teach myself psychic ability, and now she's on this whole other path where she like does medical intuitive like energetic healings, and she says she's shown like futuristic devices sometimes, and like she gave me a reading on the show, and she's like, oh, what happened to you in 1974? I'm like, well, that's the year I was born actually, and she's like, okay, I'm getting you were actually in your mother's womb, and you got the umbilical cord wrapped around your neck, and you almost died. Like, you could have died, and it's like, oh, was there a timeline where that is actually what happened? So it gets interesting when you think about like your children and like sort of choice points.
Yeah.
But like, are there other choice points that are happening on a whole different levels that you're just not even like? To me, that brings some level of calm about like, oh, it's more like my higher self already chose. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. People will have the option. Like there are going to be people who choose not to and leave it up to chance or just in general, and then some people are going to definitely, like me for example, I would definitely want.
Definitely, right?
I mean, look at parents these days. Like kids, even up to like 5 years old, it's a super hard competition to get them into the best preschools, to get them like all these extracurricular activities.
Right.
So I think in a world where there's so much technology and so much data and so much of a need to have a good intellect, we're going to have to adapt biologically in order to understand all of the data coming into our senses through technology.
Right.
I think it's just something that I would want it for myself. Like if I could go back and say, guys, please increase my IQ by 20, make me more empathetic so I didn't make a bunch of mistakes when I was younger, and maybe make me, I don't know, a little funnier or something.
So what is your vision? Like, what do you think is, obviously technology is this sort of like, I've heard it talked about like this idea, the quickening, like, oh, it took us, I really like that term. It's like, thousands. Have you ever seen the movie Waking Life?
I haven't.
Highly recommend it. You would love it. Like, Richard Linklater, I believe, is the amazing, like, Dazed and Confused, and
love that movie.
Okay, yeah, me too. Yeah. Like, dude, so good.
And Half-Baked, if we're gonna go.
All right. So, Waking Life is like very psychedelic. It's like it's all about this guy having astral projection, like out of body experience kind of stuff, and it's they filmed it, but then they drew over it, and this is going back 15, 20 years ago. So it was like very like, whoa, this is kind of like cutting edge what they did here visually. So it's a very psychedelic, like philosophical, like this guy's in the lucid dream state, having out of body experience, and like all these characters are coming in and out, and it talked. One of the scenes is this guy in his dream state talking about the quickening. Oh, it took us thousands of years. We think modern man's been around 200,000-300,000 years. For so much of that, we imagine. Of course, you have the people now who say like, "Oh, we've been around much longer. We had ancient civilizations that were more advanced than us." But you go back in recent history, it's like, "Oh, we think we were using like the same stone axes for thousands and thousands of years." Not a lot of shift and change, and then finally you get up to after 100, let's say 50,000 years, all of a sudden now you're up to modern history, 10,000 years. We find all of a sudden there's a little bit of a change. Agriculture and not hunter-gatherers, and some level of shift. But then there's a shorter period of time to go from 10,000 years up to, like the Dark Ages, and all of a sudden there's a new shift, but it was a much shorter gap,
Yes.
And then you go from there to, Industrial Revolution. Okay, now that's only hundreds of years, right, to this big shift. Then you go from there to like the current age, right? Even shorter,
Yes.
and so you're getting this quickening, right? So it's like 1 turns to 2, 2 turns to 4, it's like, and then in that movie he goes, we're going to get to where what would have been a billion years of evolution happens in an afternoon.
Yes.
And it's like, whoa, like,
Yes.
So, and then you apply that same sort of perspective to like technology, like, what do they say? It doubles every few
2
years.
years.
Yeah. So like, hold on. So technology just went from, where it is now to 2 years from now, it's double that.
Yep.
Like what? So where are we going? What do you foresee? I've heard some of the ideas. Oh, we're going to become full cyborgs, like, within, 20 years or whatever. Who's the futurist? Ray Kurzweil. I remember him talking about this like a while back. I think he was even predicting. And this is years back. I don't remember when his time frame was, but it was not in the very distant future where he's like, okay, we're going to become like cyborgs, and here's, So what do you think it's going to look like 10 years from now, 50 years from now?
Sure. So first of all, about Ray Kurzweil, so I agree with Kurzweil. And actually in the AI community, he's kind of a controversial figure because he's making predictions like some sort of prophet.
Yeah.
But I think he's on point. I mean, right now he's a director of engineering at Google. I think he's a smart guy. So I agree with him. In terms of what I envision the future to look like in 10 years from now, technology as we know it is becoming biotechnology. So right now when we think of technology, we think of steel, we think of silicon, transistors, but right now the trend in computer science is towards biological substrates. So for example, right now we're using silicon to do computing, but eventually we're going to use DNA to do computing. Instead of using flash drives and hard drives to store our data and store it using electromagnetism, we're going to use DNA as well. DNA storage is already a thing that's happening. Right now, Microsoft has this new DNA storage device that could store all of the internet's data. And that's the size of a single DNA strand. A single DNA strand in your body is capable of holding 512 petabytes of data. That's basically more data than you've ever generated in your life, talking every day, all that data. It's almost an unimaginable amount of data that's stored in a single strand of DNA. So that's just like, so this example that you were saying about, which is called Moore's Law, of computing power doubling every 2 years, that's based on silicon. But when we move to a biological substrate, it's not 2 years anymore.
Quantum computing.
In quantum, it moves to like 1,000 every 2 years.
Shit.
So it really is exponentially increasing. You're right. The Industrial Revolution, the Dark Ages, if you look at the progress of technology, it really is accelerating. And now it's accelerating to a point like we can't even keep track of everything that's happening. Like we're not physically able to do that. So 10 years from now, I think that when Ray Kurzweil says we're going to be cyborgs, we think of steel, we think of robotics. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be totally natural and biological. But we'll have created technologies that allow us to perceive reality in a way that we cannot now. So in a typical day, you'd wake up and you'd perform either creativity or discovery. Have you ever used Tilt Brush, the VR tool?
No.
Tilt Brush is like this way to do painting with a VR, and it's in 3D. So you have a paintbrush and you can just paint 3D sculptures. So that was a tool that allowed us, painters, to now have this extra dimension to how they could paint.
Yeah.
So that's going to happen with technology, whereas right now we have this color spectrum that we can see, red, blue, green, black. There are colors that exist that we just cannot even perceive. There are concepts like music that we all love, but there are also concepts out there like music that we just can't even physically perceive. They're outside of the range of human consciousness, but with technology, we can start perceiving it. So we're going to have, like we have musicians right now, in 10 years, we'll have some other gen, like X gen, that we don't even know what it is. So it's going to involve creativity, whether it's using paintbrush, 3D tools, or, sculpting, whatever, or discovery, where you decide, today I want to discover a new type of species, or I want to discover something about myself or something. So that's kind of the frame that I look at it. It was like creativity and discovery are two things that all humans will be able to do and love as well.
Wow. That's a very optimistic viewpoint, and like perspective, like, and how quickly it's coming, like you said, if this, you take Moore's law, you take this idea of the quickening, it's like it's speeding up. I mean, then you apply it to biology. It's like, and this is something I talk about. Like before I launched this podcast, I actually wrote a book that's like literally sitting on the shelf that probably should be updated now because of Moore's law and these concepts. But the title of it is The Fountain of You, and it's how science and spirituality are merging to birth us into the age of timelessness.
I should read it. That's right up my alley.
Yeah, right? And I got the Google Drive. It's on Google for you. So I was like, okay, at the time I was like, okay, I'm going to focus on my podcast. Maybe I'll put this out later, and still, probably will happen one day. So it, but it's this idea for me that's so inspiring to think, I could live to, there's scientists saying, I could live, the first people to live to be, one, what's his name? I can't remember his name off the top of my head now, but he's talking about like people alive now that could live to be 1,000 years old.
Operator Gray?
Yes, that's it. Yes, thank you. And then you have others like more conservative. The first people to live to be 150 healthily, or 50, 60, whatever now. So here we are, the way I view it is like once you start understanding that we're eternal beings and, having a physical experience and time is illusory, it's like, what does it really mean? It's like Shaman Durek, who I had on this podcast a while back, and on the first episode of Optimistic, which of course hasn't been released yet as of the time of this recording, but you guys will see it in that interview. He's like, I don't celebrate my birthday. I don't need to tell the story to my cells about how old I am to like buy into this paradigm of aging and He like, I don't do that. Yeah. And it's like, what an interesting way to perceive it. So when you start thinking of like, hold on, I'm awakening to who and what I am, multidimensionally, eternal. I always say to people on their birthdays, like you said, you're 28. I don't believe you were created 28 years ago. You incarnated in the physical dimension 28 years ago. So I always say happy 3D incarnation anniversary. That's like my timeline post, my signature timeline post. And so when you start looking at it from that viewpoint and like you understanding spiritually what's going on, and then you start understanding what's going on with technology, it's like you and I 50 years from now could look and feel better than we do now. It's a possibility, a very strong possibility, I feel. Yes. So it's like we're on the cutting edge of like just completely changing the narrative of what it means to age, yes. And get to really be like, we're the it's almost like, could you imagine 1,000 years from now? They're in the generation of the oldest that are still, what I mean, still alive. Like, what a crazy concept to even wrap our brains around. And it also so empowering to think, it's not these stories of, it's too late for me, I'm too old, all that nonsense. Like, I know where I'm at in my own journey. It's like, I'm just getting warmed up. Yes. A lot of people at my age, I can look at people I went to high school with and stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, you look like my great grandmother. Yeah. Like, meanwhile, I had, saw a friend yesterday I hadn't seen in a year. And like, wow, are you, I've heard it a few times in the last couple of months. Like, are you getting younger? Like you look, you know what I mean? It's like, I'm telling that story. Like I've told this story my whole life. Like I don't believe in getting sick. It's like, I haven't been in a hospital since the day I was born. It's like, we create like the biology of belief. Bruce Lipton was on the show. Like you're literally, they see a third of all treatments are basically placebo. Now I heard the other day, it's like what, including surgeries, including it's like what a wild thing. Anyway, that's me really a long-winded rant posed as a question. Yeah. What are your thoughts on like aging and technology.
Well, I think in terms of anti-aging, there is a subset of people in that field who are totally materialists in that they are deathly afraid of actually dying, in that they don't think that there's anything afterwards, and that we are singular consciousness. But I think the idea behind choosing when you want to die is a good thing. And advanced yogis, for example, they say that they could choose when they die. They could go into their consciousness and turn off the different levels of their body's states until they gracefully leave. But that requires years, like decades of mental and physical discipline. In terms of technology, I look at it as like translating that ability into the power of everyday people who haven't practiced 20 years on how to choose when they die, but they can do so with technology. So these kind of technologies. SENS is the program where Aubrey de Grey works, who you mentioned. There's all sorts of different drugs that you can use to prevent aging. Resveratrol is one obvious one that most people are aware of, but there are other ones that are coming out, all these acronyms, but it's like NTB.
Oh,
NMT or something?
And yes, I took it for a little bit. I know exactly what you're talking about.
And there's this thing called like NAD. It's like a patch.
NAD,
the NAD
patch. Yep.
My friend's like wears it on his ass, like literally.
What's the one that's like the buckyballs? Do you know that one?
I don't.
Gosh, I'm forgetting what that one is. There's another one that like they say it's like a super antioxidant supposedly, and it looks like a buckyball and like its structure. Shoot, I'm forgetting what that one's called too. There's so many of these anti-aging like things,
which is great. I think like I don't want to just die when I'm not finished with whatever I have to do in this plane. I want to be able to choose when I die. That would be ideal. I think everyone should have that option. I say, aging isn't optional. Getting old is. Yes, like your mind. That's true.
It really is, man. It really is.
I'm definitely noticing that. Just like as I get older, like things that were fun to me when I was younger are not anymore. Like getting drunk at bars.
Right. Yeah, it's just not appealing.
Not appealing anymore.
Totally. So, what are your thoughts on VR? I mean, that's really just kind of this burgeoning, sort of technology. To me, I feel like it's going to become like this staple part of our. I think there will be people that like, I can see it 20 years from now. It's like, oh, these people who literally just live completely in virtual, worlds. Once again, Russian nested dolls to some degree. Like, okay, this life is like, and then it gets you thinking instantly as I say that, it's like, hold on, is the real me this fat slob on a couch in some other dimension that like, it's like, okay, this sucks, I'm going in, I'm going to go be branded, like whatever. I don't think so, I hope not. But what is your thoughts on how you see VR developing?
So let me first ask you, have you tried VR?
Yes.
Yeah, which one did you try?
I tried the newest Oculus that just came out.
The Rift, nice. With the controllers?
Yeah.
Nice.
My brother
what did you think of it?
I thought it was awesome. I think it's really like pretty fascinating. I mean, obviously it's still like somewhat rudimentary in what can be done. You see the potential. What's really wild about it is how realistic it feels. Like, you take it off and it's like, whoa, I was like literally kind of somewhere else. It's pretty real, and I know it'll only get more so.
It's only going to get more real. I just bought it as well 3 weeks ago. I've had it in my home now for 3 weeks. I love it. I got the original version of Oculus like 5 years ago, like the developer version. It was terrible. It gave me nausea. I was like, this sucks. Now it's gotten really good. And like you said, it's going to continually get better. Let me say this though, that very few people have heard of. The CEO of Netflix was asked what the future of entertainment looks like, and he responded, it's going to be a pill. It's going to be a pill that you take, some sort of engineered, like I said, genetic engineering, pharmacological engineering is going to be a thing, an engineered experience in your mind. So that's the virtual reality. So right now we think of putting something on your face as a virtual, but eventually it's going to be just, it's what is reality but a series of biochemical reactions in your brain to what you perceive. So if you can engineer those, then it could be a pill, it could be an interface like what you wear on your face. These are all different mediums for perceiving different realities. And I think in the future, 10, 15 years in the future, we're going to just choose what reality we want to be in using various different mediums.
Wow. A pill.
Pill.
The red pill or the blue pill.
Yeah.
Right?
Matrix 4 is coming out.
I know.
Super excited.
Oh, dude, I know. Speaking of simulations, that was just announced this week.
Yeah. Everybody in the whole AI community is super hyped about it.
You know what I love about the reflections, like, of, you know, the blurry lines between, I think of one of my favorite movies. Have you seen What Dreams May Come?
I haven't.
Okay. Check out What Dreams May Come with Robin Williams.
I love Robin Williams. Yeah,
So it's my favorite with him, and it's like, it's all about like suicide. He's dealing with suicide in the movie, in the afterlife, and most of the movie happens in another dimension of reality. And like, it's like, oh, what? And then when he ended up committing suicide, it's like, oh wow,
Yeah.
wow, like the the sort of like the crossover. Or Neo, the one, right? Here's this character Keanu played, who happens to be like, you know, like this very, like, ever more so incredible example of a, like, almost like, you know, embodying like Christ consciousness kind of energy, like, you know, giving away, like, he's just done so much good, and like, you know, kind of very understated, and like hasn't really advertised it. And it's like, it seems like now it's like coming out more and more and more, you know. And it's like, oh, what an interesting thing. Like, the guy who played this, to me, I remember when I was like 23 or so, I had my first, 24, I had my first astrological chart reading, and the woman like knew the Wachowskis, right?
Oh, nice.
And she was from Chicago, they're from Chicago, whatever. And she like gave me a reading, and she compared my chart to theirs, and the Matrix had just come out, and she's like, oh, you have one of the most successful charts I've ever seen, and you know, but you're going to go through a lot of hardship first. And I'm like, no. And I'm like, sure, in retrospect, good job. You know, and I remember saying my son, who was like 6 months at the time, she's like, oh, he's like a golden child. Like, you know, you do all these amazing things, but it's, you know, more of a challenge you getting there. And he just sort of like steps into like, you know, everything he touches is gold, kind of remember saying. Yeah. And but I remember her basically comparing my chart to the Wachowskis, and at the time that was like the highest compliment, because I'm like, to this day, they're my favorite movies. Yeah. Like, you know, some people say they're the most philosophical movies ever made. And so I think it's really interesting to see how Keanu's like sort of, you know, his personality in some way reflects like that, you know, that Christ consciousness kind of vibe, right? And like, yes. Oh, he was the one, and you know, one of the things I think we all have to deal with as we remember we are the one, mm-hmm. right? Because we all are the one. And I think a lot of people have to go through that. Like, I've seen it a bunch of times. I know I had to deal with it. Like, as I sort of woke up to who and what I am, and I started having these powerful spiritual experiences and like messages like, yo, you're this character that's going to play this grandiose role. And it's like, and then you have to deal with like the ego side of it. And I think a lot of people get lost in that, you know? And I think it's almost like a rite of passage, I feel like, when you realize, yeah, you are the one, but so is everyone else. and I don't know exactly where I was going with that, but I think, it just started off by saying, like, I feel like Keanu is really interesting how it mirrors like the characters he's played in the movies, in the movie of Keanu, which is another movie, Nested Doll, right?
That's super trippy. Keanu is one of those other people like you who is, he doesn't look his age at all. He looks much younger. Yeah. It's almost a conspiracy. Like, what's he up to? Like, right. Which is amazing. Keanu is also just a super humble dude. Now, I've never met him, but everybody who's ever met him is like super humble. He like rides the subway. He like offers a seat to other people. He stands. Like, this is a guy who's made more money than so much. And still humble. Yeah. Nice. He really is the one.
Yeah, right. No, I mean, he actually, I think it was, I don't know if it was Matrix or one of his other films. I think it might have been Matrix, where the deal he made, I don't know if you've ever heard this, like he negotiated a percentage of the movies themselves, and then he gave that to all the people who were part, like all the like grips and the like, you know, the people he just like shared it, you know.
That's amazing.
But when you start understanding, like I call it the good kind of selfish, when you start understanding I am the one and they're the one, so what's good for them is good for me, and you start living your life from that perspective, and then like this idea of resources or money, currency is meant to like flow through, not something, you want to create stagnation and calling in currency, put it in a, vault and close the door, and that's what a lot of people I think have done who've attracted a lot in their world. It's like, yeah, they attracted a lot of abundance because of some perspective on their ability and worth. Like they told the story that they are worthy, and that was then reflected. Yeah. Then though, compared to what they could have attracted had they allowed it to continue to flow and sort of had a better understanding of how they did it, that's sort of my aim. It's like I've been calling in like incredible amounts of abundance into my life, and I want to, like, when I leave, I have none of it left because I've like shared it, in such a way that's like, okay, I need you to get this last lunch. Siraj, you've been doing well, man.
Yeah. Here you go.
Come down off your AI spaceship for a minute and be like, let's get a lunch.
Hold on, I gotta go into VR first.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that mentality of like using abundance and wealth and capital as fuel to serve others. And I strive to do that as well. Yeah. Yeah,
and enjoying yourself along the way doesn't mean depriving the self. It's like, take only what you need, right? That song, like the MGMT, take only what you need from it. I love that.
I love MGMT.
Yeah, it's such a great like line. And so yeah, that's sort of, and using your own abilities to sort of like, technology, same thing. Like, how do we use it to end poverty? This idea that like there's people out there, there's children out there that why we're having this conversation have died because of this monetary system and this idea of separation mentality, and there's not enough, this lack of abundance. Meanwhile, there's plenty for everyone to live like a king and queen.
Yes.
It's wild. Like,
it is truly wild. They say Mark Andreessen is this venture capitalist. He had a quote that kind of stuck with me. It's like, the future's already here. It's just not distributed. I was like, yeah.
Wow.
Right.
Dude, that's, whoa.
Yeah.
That's powerful and so true.
It's insane. Like, if you go into these like super developing countries, like they just don't even have hope. Like, there's nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. At least we have hope here. Like, we can climb up this social ladder.
Yeah.
Here in the United States, but that's why I think technology can be a great force for good as long as they have a network connection. Then SpaceX just launched like 1,000-something satellites to give the whole world Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Which is a great development. So once they get like a $100 cheap laptop, access to the internet, they can start building wealth.
Yeah, right.
Using just knowledge.
Yeah.
Which is super empowering.
Super.
Creating local jobs and automating away all of those intellectual tasks that are already there.
Yeah.
They have people who are like, they're still milkmen in large parts of the world. Create a milk delivery service.
Yeah, right.
Create jobs, and
right.
I think that's the way to empowerment. Not just handouts, but like.
Yep.
What's that fish quote?
Yeah.
Don't teach a man.
Yeah. Give a man a fish, feed him for a day. Teach him how to fish, feed him for a lifetime.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, this has been so super cool, Siraj. Like, as we kind of wind down here, one of the things that I love to ask, and usually I give people a little heads up, and I forgot to give you heads up, so hopefully something comes to mind, is I love to hear a story of synchronicity or serendipity or a positive paranormal story, something that was like super inspiring. Does anything come to mind for you that has happened to you that, like, especially as you've been newly on your path?
I think that the people who I've met in my life that I connect with, they're usually through some form of technology. And I think technology is a great force to bring together people with similar sets of values. And in terms of synchronicity, in Tanzania, for example, I went there to shoot the pilot for this documentary, and we were looking for people that we could interview there. But it turns out, we tried so many different sources, but like it was really hard to connect with people. And so I just made the bet of, we're just going to go there and like on the ground, like go find people, which was a super risky bet because I invested a lot into it.
Yeah.
We get there, we start going to different like government offices and asking people, and it's the last day that we're going to be in this specific town. And right at that last moment, I'm just like sad. I'm just like thinking, this was stupid. I should have tried to find somebody. Everybody I tried to, they didn't respond or something. It turned out that on the last day there, I got a message from someone. He's like, hey, I'm a part of the School of AI here in Tanzania. I'd like to meet you. And then just like,
Wow.
it was as if it was preordained.
Right.
Like, ask and you shall receive kind of thing.
Right.
Where, because I had this idea of selflessly serving, like that was my whole intent, the universe kind of conspired to help me with my goal.
Yeah.
Even when all hope was lost.
And oftentimes it's when all hope is lost. Have you ever heard the story of Oprah in the movie The Color Purple?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love Oprah.
Yeah, it's the same thing. She's like wanted this role in this movie so badly, and she'd finally, she had auditioned for it months and months before, and she'd finally like given up, like, okay, this isn't going to happen for me. I think she was on a treadmill or something, and like had this whole, like, she's on a treadmill working out or something, like, okay, I'm going to let this go. I'm release it, give it up. It's not happening for me like I had hoped, and, surrender, right? And I think she, even if I recall, it's been a long time since I heard the story, it might even have been in tears or something, and then as she had this release, someone comes like, oh, there's a call here, for you, and it was the director, or whatever. Once again, the particulars, it might have been Steven Spielberg even, like, them offering her the job in this case, like right when she had fully surrendered to it, And I think oftentimes in life that's sort of how things flow. It's like, oh, you're down to your last, a little bit, but what you really wanted was based and really well intended and good, and then it unfolds, in an incredible way.
Yeah, I love being alive.
Yes, me too, man. It's non-depressive right now, isn't it?
Yes.
Oh, man. So for people who want to connect and follow your work, what is the best way?
Search Siraj on YouTube, Siraj. Also Twitter, Siraj Raval. Hopefully if I'm doing my job, you just have to search my first name.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think you've got the Siraj search locked down.
Yeah.
And rightly so. You definitely, I think, what you're doing, the work you're doing is a really, really big deal. It's like someone who's being a positive voice in a area of development that is, there's so much fear around it. So I just applaud you for stepping forward and, choosing to sort of spearhead and inspire. I think of all the developers and people that are really geared to focus on this sort of stuff. How many are tuning into you, and how many have probably changed their perspective based off of you being this, this leader that's, sort of offering them, like, it's like, when I talk about this often because I love it, like when a race car driver, when they teach them to, how to drive, one of the things is if you start spinning out, you don't look at the wall. Because if you look at the wall, guess what? You're definitely going to hit.
You're going to hit it.
You look away from the wall. So you're teaching people to look away from the wall.
I love that analogy.
And it's a beautiful thing, man, and I applaud it.
Thank you. And I applaud what you're doing too.
Thank you so much. All right, everyone. Well, I do have one final question for you. My cliche and very canned final question is this. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life according to Siraj Raval?
Meaning of life is to realize the self within. And to do so using any kind of technology that you want to use that seems best to fit into your life. Whether it's meditation technology, whether it's silicon hardware, a computer, a specific health plan, exercise, workout, diet plan. But to realize the self within, and to realize that I am you and he is me as you are me and we are all together is the point.
Yeah. Yes. Well said, my friend Siraj. You're an inspiration. Keep on doing what you're doing. And thank you for stopping by.
Thank you so much.
Till next time, journey well, everyone. Love you all so much. And if you're feeling the call to come for a week retreat-style Mystic Manor immersion, remember to go now and book your time to speak with me directly about stepping into the optimistic vortex at calendly.com/talkwithbrandon while there are still spots left. Otherwise, I look forward to co-creating magic with you at the Mystic Manor.